My parents stole my 200K for my sister. Still remember the day everything began to fracture in my life. A day that started like any other but ended with a revelation that shook my core. It was a cool, clear morning when I logged into my bank account, expecting to see the fruits of years of hard work and diligent savings. There, glaring at me like a cruel joke, was a stark reminder that something was terribly wrong. My account had been drained of nearly $200,000. I had spent countless nights and early mornings planning for a future of stability and independence, only to discover that the money I had painstakingly saved was no longer mine. The shock was immediate and overwhelming, and as I sat there in stunned silence, my mind raced through a series of questions that I couldn't yet fathom. How could this be? Who would do such a thing? And most painfully of all, why would someone so close to me betray the trust I had placed in them? The days that followed, a gnawing feeling of betrayal consumed me. I began to retrace every step of my financial journey, meticulously reviewing statements and transactions, trying to pinpoint the moment when everything had changed. The numbers were clear. $200,000 was gone, and the evidence, as cold as it was, pointed to a deliberate, calculated move. It wasn't a random act of fraud from an unknown hacker. It was something far more personal. As I dug deeper, the trail led me uncomfortably close to home. Slowly, with a sinking heart, I realized that the fingerprints on this financial catastrophe belonged not to an outsider, but to my own parents. Realization hit me like a tidal wave. My parents, the very people I had trusted implicitly, were somehow involved in this unimaginable theft. I struggled to comprehend the possibility. How could the people who had nurtured me, who had always preached honesty and sacrifice, commit such an act? And why, I wondered in a mix of disbelief and heartbreak, would they steal my hard-earned money? The answer, when it finally surfaced, was even more painful than the act itself. They had taken my money from my sister. I had always known there was a subtle favoritism in our family, an unspoken promise that my sister's needs and dreams would be prioritized above all else. But I had never imagined that it would come at such a staggering cost, at the cost of my own future. I was forced to confront a reality I had never wanted to accept. Memories of family gatherings, shared meals, and whispered confidences flooded my mind, each recollection now tainted by the knowledge that behind every act of kindness, there might have lurked a hidden agenda. I spent sleepless nights questioning my past, wondering if I had been naive or perhaps complicit in some way by not recognizing the warning signs. I thought back to the countless times I had silently watched as my sister was given every opportunity and advantage, while I was left to fend for myself. The disparity had always stung, but I had buried those feelings under layers of hope and loyalty. Now, that hope had turned to ash, and my loyalty felt like a heavy chain around my neck. The isolation of my room, I began to piece together the timeline. There were small details I had overlooked, a vague conversation about a family investment that I was never fully briefed on, a series of bank transfers that I dismissed as routine, and the unexplained absences of my parents during times when important financial decisions were made. Each piece of evidence, once seen in isolation, now converged into a painful narrative of deception. I recalled the hushed tones and secretive glances exchanged between my parents and my sister during family discussions. I remembered the way my sister's eyes sparkled with a secret that she never shared, a secret that, in hindsight, explained everything. Betrayal was not just financial. It was deeply personal. The money I had saved was not merely a sum on a balance sheet. It was my ticket to a better life, a symbol of my dedication and dreams. With that money gone, my plans for the future, my ambitions, and my very identity as an independent adult were suddenly thrown into question. I felt as if the foundation of my life had been eroded by those I trusted the most. The emotional devastation was as significant as the monetary loss, and I found myself at a crossroads where anger, sorrow, and disbelief battled for dominance in my heart. Now, as I sit here and begin to document every painful detail, I realize that this is only the beginning of a long journey. A journey to uncover why my parents chose to prioritize my sister's future over mine, and to understand the depths of a betrayal that cuts deeper than any financial wound. The path ahead is shrouded in uncertainty and laden with emotional obstacles, but I know that I must press on. I owe it to myself to seek answers, to confront the painful truths, and eventually to reclaim the part of me that was lost when trust was shattered. With each passing day, the need for resolution grows stronger, even as the fear of what I might discover looms large. I have decided that I will not let this betrayal define me, even if it means facing the darkest corners of my family's secrets. This is the story of how my life was upended by those I loved, and how in the face of immense betrayal I am determined to find a way back to the truth and ultimately to my own redemption. Days following that gut-wrenching discovery were a blur of sleepless nights and endless questions. I found myself consumed by a desperate need to understand how everything had unraveled so seamlessly. Every morning, I awoke with a heavy dread, a sense that the foundation of my life had been stealthily undermined. I began my investigation in a haze of disbelief and sorrow, sifting through bank statements, emails, and old family records as if each piece of paper might whisper the truth. The more I looked, the more I realized that nothing in my financial history could explain the sudden vanishing of nearly $200,000. It was as if a dark hand had reached into my future and snatched it away, leaving behind nothing but fragments of broken promises. I remember sitting at my cluttered desk, the soft hum of my computer the only sound in the silent room. I spread out every piece of evidence I could gather, scanned documents, screenshots of bank transfers, and handwritten notes from past conversations that now seemed charged with hidden meaning. Each document was a small piece of a puzzle that, when assembled, painted a grim picture of betrayal. I recalled the discreet conversations I had overheard during family gatherings, the knowing looks my parents exchanged when my sister was mentioned, and the subtle shifts in tone whenever financial matters were brought up. It was as if my entire family had been living a lie, and I was the last to realize the truth. Began reaching out to people I once trusted. I called a few relatives who, in quieter moments, had hinted at knowing more than they let on. In hushed tones over phone lines and during furtive meetings in the back of a local coffee shop, I asked probing questions that were met with evasive answers and sudden changes of subject. The more I pressed, the more I sensed that a veil of secrecy had long been drawn over our family's financial dealing. It was as if the closer I got to the truth, the tighter that veil became. My heart ached with each evasive reply, each silenced confession that hinted at a history of favoritism and concealed motives. The weight of this betrayal pressed down on me, driving me into long nights of solitary reflection. I questioned every moment of my past, the times I had put my faith in my parents' guidance, the subtle lessons I had learned about sacrifice and loyalty, and the unspoken understanding that family came first. Yet as painful as these memories were, they no longer provided comfort. Instead, they morphed into evidence of a system I had trusted implicitly, a system that had ultimately chosen my sister over me without a second thought. I began to wonder if my ambition and my painstaking savings had been seen as a threat, or simply as collateral in a larger plan to secure a future for someone else. In my quest for answers, I found myself oscillating between denial and a burning need for clarity. I would retrace every step of my financial journey, from the moment I first opened a bank account to the time I diligently transferred funds into what I thought was my secure saving. Each transaction, each seemingly insignificant detail, became a focal point of investigation. I even started learning about the legal avenues available to victims of financial fraud, wondering if there was any recourse for the kind of betrayal that cut so deeply into my life. Every phone call to a bank representative, every visit to a local branch, was tinged with a mix of hope and fear, that someone might confirm my suspicions and fear that doing so would shatter the remnants of trust I had left. Amid this internal storm, I also grappled with the profound emotional isolation that accompanies such a betrayal. Friends and acquaintances, though sympathetic, could not fully comprehend the intricate dance of trust and deception that had taken place within my own home. The silence from those I once held dear was as painful as the knowledge of what had been done to me. It was a silence that echoed with unasked questions and unresolved accusations. I felt isolated in a way that was almost physical, a cold, heavy solitude that settled around me and made every attempt at normalcy seem like a cruel joke. As I pieced together the puzzle of my stolen future, one thought loomed larger than all the rest. Why my parents? The answer was elusive, hidden beneath layers of familial duty, sacrifice, and perhaps a deeply rooted belief that my sister's needs outweighed my own. Each new discovery only deepened the mystery, forcing me to confront painful truths about favoritism, parental ambition, and the unspoken bargains that govern family life. In this relentless search for answers, I realized that I was not just uncovering a financial fraud, but also the intricate dynamics of a family relationship that had always seemed unassailable. By the time the dusk of that long, tortured day settled in, I was left with more questions than answers. The quest for the truth had only just begun, and the shadows of deception were still as long as they had ever been. Yet, despite the mounting doubts and the searing pain of betrayal, I knew I could not rest until I had unraveled every hidden thread that bound my family's secrets together. With each passing moment, the need for clarity grew more urgent, and I vowed to pursue it, even if it meant facing the darkest corners of my own past and the family that I once loved unconditionally. The shock of that initial discovery had begun to give way to a simmering determination, a need to face the ugly truth head-on, even if it meant confronting the people I once trusted implicitly. I spent the early days wrestling with a tidal wave of emotions, anger, betrayal, and an almost paralyzing sadness that seemed to press in on every corner of my mind. It was during one particularly restless night, as I sat in my dimly lit living room surrounded by scattered financial statements and scribbled notes, that I resolved to confront my parents. I knew that any attempt to heal or understand would be futile unless I demanded answers directly from the source. The decision to set up a family meeting filled me with both dread and a strange sense of empowerment. I spent hours rehearsing what I would say, each word carefully chosen, as if it were a lifeline thrown across a chasm of shattered trust. I wanted to understand how the person who had once been my guiding light could now be the architect of such devastation. With every passing minute, the weight of my unanswered questions pressed heavier on my chest, driving me to arrange a time when we could sit down together. No distractions, no pretense, just raw truth. And the day of the meeting arrived. The atmosphere in our family home was thick with tension. I remember the moment clearly. The living room, usually filled with warm, inviting light, now felt oppressive, as if the very walls were aware of the storm about to break. My parents greeted me with smiles that were tinged with an unsettling mixture of concern and something I couldn't quite decipher. There was my sister, too, her expression unreadable, her eyes darting between me and our parents, as if silently pleading for some form of explanation. I took a deep breath and began by recounting the events that had led to this confrontation: the drained bank account, the painstaking investigation, the painful realization that everything I had worked for had been siphoned away. Each word felt like a dagger, but I forced myself to continue, determined to hear their side of the story. Their initial reaction was a blend of shock and denial, their faces contorting into expressions that suggested they had not anticipated such an outburst from me. My father tried to interject, his voice low and measured, as if he were trying to find the right words to justify the unthinkable. My mother, tears glistening in her eyes, fumbled with her words, offering apologies that felt more like rehearsed lines than genuine regret. As I pressed on, demanding clarity, the conversation turned into an emotional battleground where every statement was loaded with years of hidden resentments and unspoken truths. I could see in their eyes the weight of secrets they had carried for too long, and in that moment, I realized that our family's dysfunction ran far deeper than I had ever imagined. Discussions spiraled into accusations and bitter revelations. I accused them of betrayal and selfishness, of sacrificing my future to elevate my sister's prospects without my consent or even a hint of discussion. Their defense was a litany of justifications, claims of providing better opportunities for her, of ensuring the family legacy, of making hard choices for the greater good. Yet none of these reasons could ever justify the enormity of what they had done. The conversation was raw and painful, each minute stretching out as we delved into long-buried grievances and resentments. In the midst of the confrontation, I found myself questioning not only their motives, but also my own understanding of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As the hours wore on, it became clear that this was not merely a debate about money. It was an emotional reckoning, a collision of values and ideals that had been obscured by years of unspoken expectations and familial duty. I could sense that my parents were torn between their desire to shield my sister from the harsh realities of life and the overwhelming guilt of betraying my trust. Their words, though measured and carefully chosen, could not mask the deep-seated conflict raging beneath the surface. I listened as they recounted old decisions made under the guise of necessity, decisions that, in hindsight, revealed a pattern of favoritism and sacrifice at my expense. That moment, I realized that the path to understanding would be long and fraught with pain. The meeting ended with no clear resolution, only a fragile truce and the heavy burden of unresolved questions. I walked away feeling both empty and strangely empowered, as though I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my identity and my future. The truth was out, and while the wounds were far from healed, I knew that confronting the shadows was the only way to move forward. At night, as I lay awake replaying every word and every tear that had been shed, I understood that this confrontation was only the beginning. I was now on a quest not just to recover the money that had been stolen, but to unravel the complex tapestry of love, sacrifice, and betrayal that defined my family. And despite the uncertainty of the road ahead, I was resolute. I would seek the answers I deserved, no matter how painful they might. In the wake of that explosive family confrontation, I found myself alone with a tidal wave of emotions that refused to be ignored. The raw anger, hurt, and confusion mingled with an intense curiosity, propelling me into a deeper investigation of the secrets that had long been hidden within the fabric of our family. I began to realize that the theft of my $200,000 was not just a momentary lapse in judgment or a simple case of parental favoritism. It was a symptom of a much larger, more insidious pattern that had haunted our family for years. I decided to turn my attention to the family history, searching for clues in old documents, faded photographs, and the countless unsaid words that were embedded in the memories of our past. I spent long afternoons rummaging through dusty boxes in the attic and sorting through stacks of letters that my grandparents had once penned. Each scrap of paper seemed to whisper secrets of their own, stories of sacrifices made, promises broken, and decisions taken in desperate time. As I pieced together these fragments, a pattern began to emerge. It was as if my parents had been following in the footsteps of a generation that believed in the notion of one child's future being the family's best hope for salvation, regardless of the cost to the others. The deeper I delved into these relics of our past, the more I began to question everything I thought I knew about my family. There were hints of financial struggles, long-buried resentments, and a tradition of making tough choices that often left one branch of the family flourishing while another suffered. I discovered records of loans and secret bank accounts, documents that had never been discussed openly during family gatherings, but were referenced in hushed tones when the conversation turned to legacy and duty. It became clear that the money meant for my future was just another pawn in a long game of survival, a game in which my sister was seen as the golden ticket to a better tomorrow. Late at night, I would sit by the glow of my computer screen, cross-referencing old records with my current financial statements. Each discrepancy, each unusual entry, was like a piece of a vast, dark puzzle that I was desperate to solve. I reached out to distant relatives who might hold pieces of the story that had been kept hidden for decades. Conversations that started with cautious pleasantries quickly turned into confessions of long-held grudges and secrets that had been guarded with a fierce determination. One uncle, his voice trembling with regret, recalled how, during a time of severe economic hardship, my parents had been forced to make decisions that favored one child over another, a decision made in desperation and justified as a necessary sacrifice. These revelations, though painful, provided context to the betrayal I felt so deeply. Yet even as I uncovered more about our family's troubled past, I couldn't help but feel an unsettling sense of foreboding. Every new piece of information seemed to cast a longer shadow over the present, suggesting that the motives behind the theft were intertwined with long-standing issues of identity, pride, and an almost mythic belief in preserving the family legacy at any cost. I began to wonder if the betrayal was less about malice and more about a deeply ingrained system of values that had been passed down like an unspoken creed. My mind was filled with conflicting emotions, rage at the injustice inflicted upon me, and a sorrowful empathy for the pressures that had shaped my parents' choices. One particularly stormy night, as rain pounded against my window and the wind howled like a chorus of forgotten voices, I sat down to write everything I had learned. I scribbled frantically in a worn leather journal, trying to capture every detail, every hint of motive that might explain why my future had been sacrificed for my sister. The act of writing became both a cathartic release and a way to organize my thoughts amidst the chaos. In the dim light of my desk lamp, I reread the confessions from relatives and the financial records that I had painstakingly pieced together. Each word on the page reinforced the realization that this betrayal was deeply rooted in the very identity of our family, a legacy built on choices that had prioritized one path over another. As I continued to dig deeper, I also began to notice the changes in myself. The shock and despair that had initially overwhelmed me were slowly giving way to a hardened resolve. I was no longer content with simply mourning the loss of my future. I was determined to understand the full extent of the deception and to confront it head-on. I reached out to financial experts and legal advisors, seeking guidance on how to trace every dollar that had been diverted. Their technical explanations and methodical approaches provided a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil swirling within me. Yet they both affirmed and complicated the narrative I had begun to uncover. This quiet, relentless pursuit of the truth, I realized that the journey was as much about understanding my family as it was about reclaiming what was lost. The deeper I went, the more I saw that the story was not black and white, but a series of shades and nuances shaped by decades of decisions and sacrifices. With every secret uncovered, I felt the weight of history press upon me, urging me to confront not only the actions of my parents, but the very legacy that had defined us. And though the path ahead was fraught with painful revelations and uncertain outcomes, I knew that I could not turn back. The truth was out there, hidden in the echoes of the past, and I was determined to bring it into the light, even if it meant unearthing scars that had long been concealed. The weeks following my painful confrontation with my parents, a storm of conflicting emotions raged inside me, a seething mix of anger, despair, and a growing determination to reclaim not only my financial future, but also my sense of self-worth. I found myself caught between two relentless battles, one waged within my heart against the betrayal of those I once trusted, and another fought in the practical, unforgiving realm of law and evidence. Every day seemed to stretch into an endless struggle, as I methodically gathered the fragments of proof that would, hopefully, one day piece together the full picture of how my hard-earned $200,000 had vanished into the murky depths of our family's dark past. I immersed myself in a grueling routine of document reviews and late-night research. Sitting at my desk, under the weak glow of a desk lamp, I spread out stacks of bank statements, faded receipts, and cryptic emails that hinted at secret transactions. With a magnifying glass and a notebook filled with hastily scribbled notes, I scrutinized every number, every detail. Each discovery, no matter how small, was like uncovering a hidden wound, one that needed to be acknowledged before it could begin to heal. I started noticing patterns in the transactions that I had once dismissed as mundane. They were too systematic, too deliberate. It became clear that this was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of years of calculated decisions made without my knowledge or consent. Haunted by the evidence before me, I knew that the next step was to confront the situation head-on in a way that could no longer be ignored. I arranged a meeting with a financial expert and a lawyer who specialized in family disputes and financial fraud. The meeting took place in a small, unassuming office where the air felt heavy with the weight of unspoken truth. The lawyer listened intently as I laid out the details, the missing funds, the hidden accounts, and the subtle clues embedded in years of family history. His calm demeanor provided a counterbalance to the turbulent emotions swirling inside me. He explained that while pursuing legal action against one's own family was both emotionally and legally complex, the evidence I had compiled was compelling. The path ahead would be littered with obstacles, lengthy legal battles, painful cross-examinations, and the risk of further fracturing the remaining bonds of our family. Yet, as he spoke, I felt a spark of hope flicker within me. Perhaps there was a way to right this wrong, to force my parents to answer for the choices they had made. Despite the possibility of legal recourse, a deeper, more personal battle continued to wage inside me. I began to wrestle with my own identity as a betrayed child, struggling to come to terms with the fact that the very people who had nurtured me had chosen another's future over my own. It wasn't merely about the money. It was about the recognition that my life had been deemed less valuable, that my dreams were collateral damage in a long-standing scheme designed to elevate someone else. Moments of quiet desperation, I would sit alone in my room, the silence around me punctuated only by the soft scratch of my pen as I recorded my thoughts in a battered journal. Every word I wrote was laced with a mix of bitter resentment and a yearning for closure, a desperate need to understand why my future had been sacrificed on the altar of family duty. In a bid to uncover more of the truth, I reached out to distant relatives who might have known about the financial decisions made years ago. One evening, after a particularly long day of research, I received a call from an aunt whose voice trembled with regret. In hushed tones, she revealed snippets of long-held secrets, Stories of hardship, difficult choices, and a deeply ingrained belief that sacrificing one child's potential might secure the survival of the entire family. Words, though fragmented and laced with sorrow, painted a picture of a family legacy steeped in sacrifice and a burden of expectations that had been passed down through generations. It was a revelation that, while not justifying the betrayal, added a new layer of complexity to the narrative. I realized that the theft of my future was intertwined with decades of unresolved pain, a bitter legacy of favoritism and silent compromises. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure of my dual battles, one legal, one deeply personal, became almost unbearable. I began to feel the isolation of carrying such a heavy burden. Friends offered sympathy, but few could understand the profound sense of betrayal that came from knowing that the people who should have been my protectors had instead become the architects of my downfall. Yet in this solitude, I also found a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Every piece of evidence, every whispered confession from a reluctant relative, fueled my determination to fight back. I was no longer willing to be a passive victim of a system that had robbed me of my dreams. I would take control of my narrative, no matter how painful the process might be. One crisp autumn morning, as I sat in a quiet cafe reviewing the latest findings on my laptop, I made a promise to myself. I would not let the actions of my parents define the rest of my life. The journey ahead was daunting, filled with uncertainties and the potential for further heartache. Yet, with each new document I uncovered and every legal consultation I attended, I felt a small measure of empowerment. The battle was on two fronts, one to recover my stolen future and another to heal the deep emotional wounds left behind by betrayal. And while I knew that the scars might never fully fade, I also knew that by fighting for what was rightfully mine, I was beginning to reclaim my life, one painstaking step at a time. Days following my fateful meeting with legal counsel and that emotional family confrontation blurred together in a haze of relentless anxiety and simmering determination. I felt as though I was standing at the very edge of a precipice, caught between the fierce urge to reclaim my stolen future and the ever-looming threat of further devastation from a family that was prepared to go to any lengths to protect their secrets. Each morning, I awoke to a world that felt increasingly hostile, a world where every phone call, every unexpected knock at the door, and every whispered conversation over the phone was laden with the possibility of retribution. I began to notice subtle changes in my surrounding. Old friends, once close confidants, started to drift away, their eyes filled with pity or, in some cases, silent warnings that I was playing with fire. The legal process had become more than just a means to recover my money. It had evolved into a personal battle against a system of deceit and entrenched familial loyalties that seemed impossible to break. Every day, I pored over the documents I had collected, trying to find new connections and inconsistencies that might tip the scales of justice in my favor. Yet, with each revelation, the sense of isolation deepened, as if I were the only one brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to challenge the unspoken rules of our family. One particular evening, as a storm raged outside and the relentless patter of rain drummed on my window, I received a phone call that sent shivers down my spine. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, low, and steady, a stark contrast to the chaotic emotions swirling within me. "Stop digging," the caller warned in a tone that left no room for negotiation. The message was clear. I was treading dangerous ground. For a moment, I considered abandoning my pursuit, retreating into the comfortable oblivion of denial. But as I hung up the phone, a surge of defiant resolve washed over me. I knew that turning back now would mean accepting not just the loss of my money, but the surrender of my dignity and my future. The following days were a maelstrom of heightened tension and covert actions. I began altering my routine, taking different routes to work, avoiding places where I might be recognized, and even changing the locks on my apartment door. Paranoia crept in with every passing moment, yet it was accompanied by a steely determination that I could no longer ignore. My phone became both a lifeline and a threat, filled with messages from anonymous numbers and cryptic emails that hinted at more than one hidden agenda. Every new piece of evidence that I uncovered seemed to add another layer to the intricate web of lies that had been spun around me, while simultaneously tightening the noose of danger around my neck. In an effort to fortify my case, I intensified my collaboration with both my lawyer and a small network of like-minded individuals who had their own scars from this family betrayal. Late-night strategy sessions in the quiet corners of local diners, hushed phone calls in parking lots under the cover of darkness, and furtive meetings with financial experts became my new reality. We debated every possible scenario, cross-referenced each document, and meticulously planned our next steps. It was during one of these clandestine meetings that I learned of a critical piece of evidence, a series of bank transfers hidden behind layers of coded entries that suggested the money had been funneled into an account under a pseudonym. This discovery felt like a breakthrough, a sign that the system I was up against, however convoluted, was not infallible. Yet every step forward seemed to trigger an equally forceful backlash. I began receiving more direct threats. Anonymous letters slipped under my door, ominous messages scrawled on my voicemail, and even a disturbing visit from someone who insisted on watching my every move from a distance. These encounters shook me to my core, forcing me to confront the brutal reality that my quest for justice was no longer a private battle. It had become a high-stakes conflict that endangered not only my future but possibly my very life. Still, with each threat, my resolve only hardened. I couldn't let fear dictate the terms of my existence. The thought of surrendering to this oppressive force, of letting my stolen future slip away into silence, was unbearable. As the maelstrom of tension and danger swirled around me, I found brief solace in moments of introspection. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world was shrouded in darkness and the relentless hum of anxiety was momentarily stilled, I would reflect on the journey that had brought me here. I remembered the countless hours of painstaking work, the painful confrontations, and the bitter taste of betrayal. I recalled that the $200,000 was not just money. It was the embodiment of years of sweat, sacrifice, and dreams that had been so cruelly stolen from me. And I vowed that I would not allow their treachery to define me. Standing on the precipice between retribution and despair, I knew that the next move could irrevocably alter the course of my life. The evidence was mounting, the legal battle intensifying, and the shadow of my family's dark legacy growing ever longer. But I was ready to step into the fray, even if it meant embracing the chaos and danger that lay ahead. In that moment, with the storm outside mirroring the tumult within, I resolved to confront the maelstrom head-on. I would fight for every stolen dollar, every dream that had been sacrificed, and every ounce of dignity that had been stripped away. The battle was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher, but I was prepared to risk it all for the chance to reclaim my future. Day of reckoning arrived with a weight I had long feared, and in a strange way anticipated. After months of relentless investigation, legal battles, and personal turmoil, I found myself standing in the sterile halls of a courthouse, the final arena where all the buried truths would be forced into the light. As I sat there, clutching the final bundle of documents and evidence that I had painstakingly assembled, I could almost feel the oppressive presence of my family's secrets bearing down on me. Every page I reviewed was a reminder of a future stolen and of trust shattered beyond repair. I had come so far, fighting through waves of fear and isolation, that turning back was no longer an option. The trial itself was as much an emotional gauntlet as it was a legal proceeding. My parents, once the pillars of my childhood, now stood accused of a betrayal that transcended mere financial impropriety. In the courtroom, every detail of my painstaking investigation was laid bare. A timeline of covert transfers, cryptic bank statements, and whispered confessions from relatives too burdened by guilt to remain silent any longer. The evidence was damning. The judge, solemn and methodical, allowed every shred of proof to paint a picture of years of calculated sacrifice. A family dynamic twisted by a relentless drive to secure one favored life over another. I remember the moment when my parents were called to the stand. Their eyes, once warm with parental affection, now shimmered with a mix of regret and defiance. My sister's presence, quiet and withdrawn, added a poignant layer to the proceedings. As I listened to my parents attempt to justify their actions, claiming it was for the greater good of the family legacy, I felt a surge of anger and sorrow. Their words, rehearsed and hollow, did nothing to fill the void that had been left in my heart by the loss of my future. Every statement, every pause, seemed to echo the painful truth that I was not an afterthought, but a victim of a decision made long before I could ever speak for myself. That charged atmosphere, I also found an unexpected clarity. The legal verdict was not just about reclaiming the money that had been taken from me. It was about reclaiming my identity and my right to determine my own destiny. When the judge finally pronounced the decision, a mixture of relief and melancholy washed over me. My parents were ordered to account for the misappropriated funds and to make reparations, a symbolic acknowledgement that my life, too, mattered. The victory was bittersweet. No amount of restitution could undo the years of lost opportunities, nor could it mend the fractured bonds that had once held our family together. After the gavel fell, I stepped out of the courthouse into a world that seemed both unchanged and entirely new. The air was crisp, and the sky, though overcast, hinted at the possibility of a new beginning. I felt the weight of the past slowly lift from my shoulders, replaced by a cautious optimism that came from knowing that the truth had prevailed. Yet as I walked away, I was acutely aware that the scars of betrayal would remain with me, etched into my memory as a reminder of what had been sacrificed for a skewed sense of duty and favoritism. The days that followed, the media caught wind of the story, a once-hidden family drama now splashed across headlines. While some of the public's reaction was sympathetic, I learned that the real battle was not waged in the court of public opinion, but in the quiet, personal struggle to rebuild trust in oneself. I began therapy, sought support groups, and slowly started to piece together a life that was no longer defined solely by the loss I had endured. Each step forward was tentative, but it was also liberating. I learned that forgiveness, if it ever came, had to begin with myself. I could no longer allow the betrayal to dictate the terms of my future. Looking back, the journey had been a harrowing descent into a family legacy marred by unspoken sacrifices and misguided loyalties. I had unearthed truths that I wished had remained buried, and in doing so, I had transformed from a naive dreamer into someone hardened by experience yet open to the possibility of renewal. The battle for the $200,000 had become a symbol of something far greater, a struggle for acknowledgement, justice, and the courage to forge my own path even when those closest to me had chosen a different direction. Now, as I stand on the threshold of a new chapter in my life, I do so with a tempered heart and a resolve to honor the lessons of the past without allowing them to dictate my future. The final reckoning was not the end of my story, but the beginning of a more honest, self-determined existence, a future rebuilt on the foundation of hard-won truth and the unwavering belief that, no matter how deeply one is betrayed, it is always possible to reclaim one's destiny.